Greetings viewers. Welcome back to CoffeeChillTV and the Mountain Creek Conservation Reserve, the Mountain Creek Trail. In the distance you can see the Mountain Creek Lake, which is an inlet to the Mooloolah River. We're going to head along the river and we're going to have a little bit of a walk and talk. Come along with me on CoffeeChillTV. And folks, in addition to showing you the Mountain Creek Conservation Reserve and the Mountain Creek Lake, Mooloolah River, flora, maybe some fauna, I want to get into some socio-economic, philosophical discussions. So feel free to like, share and comment on this video. If you wish to opine, keep it classy as we dig into, some philosophicals. Let's continue. And folks, maybe you can hear the birds. There's the fauna. We might see some birds. We'll see on this walkabout. There it is, the Mountain Creek Lake, Mooloolah River inlet. And that's what today's walkabout is. It's the Mountain Creek Nature Reserve walkabout. And the next headline is Retirement and the Ghost in the Machine. So why the ghost in the machine? Well, there were kind of several little prompters for me making this walk and talk video today. First of all, Ghost in the Machine, classic 1980s album by The Police, and Spirits in the Material World came up on my YouTube the other day, and I thought about that Ghost in the Machine album cover, and what a great song, Spirits in the Material World. Started me thinking about becoming a ghost. Are we all ghosts in the machine? Well, that's hard to tell, but in retirement, do we become more ghost-like? And that leads me to two other little prompters inspiring this video today. Firstly, I watched a video last year. This chap, Australian, Siem Reap, he spent a few years there. He went back on a short trip to Melbourne and he said he felt like a ghost in his hometown, and I can empathise with him. Lastly, I was prompted to make this video today after watching something on Sky News Australia a couple of days ago. Former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull coined a term several years ago when he retired. He said, in retirement, I will not become a miserable ghost. He was saying that in retirement, he didn't want to be one of those retired politicians who takes pot shots at his colleagues and contemporaries who followed. Didn't want to be a miserable ghost. After several years of being quiet, he popped up the other day with some commentary, and we don't get into we don't get down the weeds when it comes to politics on this channel. I just want to use the point to give some luster to the definition. So he popped up and he had a few things to say about the current political landscape. In effect, you could argue he was going against his own advice. A lot of people said, well, you've become what you said you wouldn't be, a miserable ghost. Why does that happen? Let's dig a bit deeper. So as we continue along the Glenfields Trail, bracken fern, considered a bit of a pest, and some big trees. Over there, eucalyptus and palms, and I love this nature reserve here in Mountain Creek because, you know, you're very close to the beach. You're less than 5 kilometres from the beach. Over there, guys, on the other side is Karawaffa Drive, you know, the Woolworths Shopping Centre, Drop Espresso Bar Cafe, the Mountain Creek Tavern, the Creek. A lot of activity. But you know what? You feel like you're a world away when you're on this trail. So, you know, the Creekside Trail, Mountain Creek Nature Reserve, dare I say it, a little bit of a hidden gem on the Sunshine Coast. So folks, it's 9:30 on a Tuesday morning as the sun sneaks through the forest, and you can see here suburbia in and around this nature reserve. And you know, I love this green space, and I hope that we keep it going. It doesn't get ploughed down and turned into transport infrastructure, etc. Not that I'm against that, but you know, from a self-centered point of view, I do like the Creekside Trail, and I hope it is we keep it. So folks, as we look at this old brush turkey nest, the Aussie brush turkey, the male, he builds a big nest to attract females, and there's a lot of brush turkeys in Mountain Creek. And this gives you an opportunity to talk about another inspiration, a prompter to today's video. So folks, another prompter. Identity capital. I was watching a guy on YouTube last week, financial planner from the States, and he spoke about identity capital. You know, when you're working, people say, hey, what do you do? I'm a teacher, I'm a boilermaker, I'm a carpenter, I'm a nurse, I'm a financial planner, a mortgage broker. Different when you retire. When you retire, hey, what's your angle? What do you do for a crust? How do you keep yourself busy? I'm retired. Right. So, keeping busy in retirement is one way to kind of combat the erosion of so-called identity capital. But it goes a little bit beyond that, doesn't it? You know, you've spent your life, particularly if you've worked in a certain occupation or profession for the majority of your working life, it does become part of your identity. Well, it did for me anyway. What do I do now I'm retired? So folks, one of the ideas that I'm going to put to you is acceptance. You're not a big deal anymore. You're not the big shot. Okay, if we circle back to, you know, former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, he was Prime Minister of this country. Not too many positions, if any, more prominent than that. You know, You've been retired for quite a few years. Maybe you want the limelight again, you know. So acceptance maybe that, you know, as we move into retirement, I've found this to be the case, you do become a little bit of a ghost, and that's not all bad. Acceptance and embrace it. That's the first strategy. Another strategy is to think about roles that you can perform in retirement that aren't paid employment. Volunteering, mentoring, community service, embracing technology, maybe becoming a YouTube creator. I did a whole video on my motivation in setting up my social media content, and one of my motivations was alleviation of boredom, the number one driving factor for me setting up myself on social media. But connected to alleviation of boredom is the fact that people say to me, hey, what do you do? I'm retired. Oh, how do you keep yourself busy? I do a bit of stuff on social media, YouTuber, Instagrammer, Facebook, Rumble, TripAdvisor, Google Guides. Hey, gratuitous cross promotion. But all that stuff, guys, helps me with my identity capital in retirement. I've found that it does erode. So, you know, you don't want to completely turn into the invisible man, the invisible woman. Maybe you do. Maybe you like being a bit of a ghost in retirement. Let's unpack that. So folks, at the start of this video, I referenced some old school reference, Casper the Friendly Ghost. Saturday morning, watching TV, watching the cartoons, Casper the Friendly Ghost. Casper the Friendly Ghost liked being a ghost. He engaged in random acts of kindness, paying it forward, and he wasn't ostentatious about it. Let me talk about a more current example in the spirit of Casper the Friendly Ghost, and the fact that maybe you want to be a bit of a ghost in retirement. Embrace it. Accept it. So folks, over the water, through the trees, you'll find your way to Karawaffa Drive. Karawaffa Drive, one of my favourite little coffee shops, the Drop Espresso Bar. And last week, I was walking back along this nature trail, just leaving the coffee shop. We'd had a lot of wind and rain, and the sandwich board for the Drop Espresso was on the ground. I saw this gentleman. He would have been in his 80s. He picked it up and put it back where it was, and he kept going. He did not seek any adjuration. He didn't post it on social media. He was silently paying it forward. A random act of kindness in the spirit of Casper the Friendly Ghost. I gave him a nod. I thought, well done to you, sir. Of course, young lady, health and fitness there. She looks to be well below retirement age to me. But hey, health and fitness does become a positive force in retirement, and it's something I'm working on, and I've got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. But hey, that's one of those things. I watched a vlog a few months ago, and this guy said, you don't need a purpose in retirement. I reckon that's a load of codswallop. Have some sort of a purpose. Your purpose doesn't have to be climbing Mount Everest, okay? But you should have some sort of purpose. That's my experience. What do you say, folks? In retirement, your purpose might be, you know, a personal best, running, on the golf course, at the gym. Whatever it is, having a bit of a purpose can help you, because you're no longer in paid employment. You know, you want to keep that relevance up. You don't want to be feeling like you're suffering from relevance deprivation. So folks, as I see it, integral to any discussions about retirement and the socio-economics, the philosophical issues in retirement that pertain to integrity capital, relevance deprivation, becoming a ghost in the machine, friendly, miserable. They're also intertwined with the concept of moving on. So another gratuitous plug, one of my earlier videos, Loy Katon 2025 Non-Project Udontani. In that video, I talk about the concept of letting go and to zero in on letting go of regret in regards my corporate career. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I will put a link at the end of the video, and please stay to the end. We're coming down the home straight. If you're watching on Rumble, you can just search, go back a few pages, you'll find it, Loy Katon 2025 Udontani, and I talk about the fact that, you know, I had some career regrets. I toyed with the idea of coming back to work, and I'm going to come back to that concept in a minute as a strategy. I decided Loy Katon last year to let it go. So if you want to move on from your corporate life, from your professional life, from your life as a tradesperson, whatever it was you did, now you're retired. You're no longer punching the clock. Letting go. Let go of any regrets of things you didn't quite achieve. I've found that useful in retirement. And folks, on that point of moving on and integrity capital, let me tell you a short story. And folks, this story, it's about 10 years old, but it's a goldie. I find it quite interesting one, and I believe totally relevant to today's walk and talk. Let me tell you the story from about 10 years ago. So folks, it was about 10 years ago. I was having coffee with a colleague, and this guy, you know, he was very much one of the movers and shakers in the company I work for, had a big retirement send-off for him, and he'd been retired for about 9 months. I was having a coffee with him, and I was in between jobs, and he'd been retired for 9 months. He told me over our cafe lattes that he'd been in to see his old colleagues. Here we go, look, a little bit of fauna. There's no shortage of flies in the Mountain Creek Reserve, just saying. If you're going to come for a walk here, guys, put on some repellent. I failed to do that, and I'm paying a price as I do this. So we had a coffee, and he told me that he'd been back in to see the guys. This is about 9 months after he retired. This guy was, you know, a bit of an elder statesman, big deal. And I said, how did it go? And he said, you know, people move on quickly. People move on quickly. I could see there's a little bit of melancholy in his voice, as well as acceptance. And hey, you know, people move on from you in retirement. You know, your relevance is no longer as great. So as a result, guys, you need to move on too. Just my 2 cents. And so, folks, here's an obvious metaphor, but metaphorically speaking, my colleague, he'd built a bridge and he got over it. You know, he's in retirement now. He's not identifying as he used to be, but it was kind of a sledgehammer for him. I could tell that, you know, just the brutal truth. People have moved on. People move on. And folks, as I keep moving in this video, we're going to head back now. So you'll see the shrubbery, maybe some fauna from a different angle. There's a few more little salient as I see it, points to make as we come down the return leg and the home straight of today's walk and talk. And it's now about 10 o'clock, guys. It's just beautiful. There's a soothing breeze in this little kind of hidden oasis, all right in the centre of the Sunshine Coast. Let's keep moving. So moving on, cuts both ways. Now, in Australia, LinkedIn. Certainly, if I'm going to talk about the financial services industry, LinkedIn's really important, particularly if you're looking for work. There are some jobs where they prefer you to apply through LinkedIn because your resume is online. And I remember going back 10 years ago when I went through a voluntary redundancy. One of the key action points: spruce up LinkedIn. Do I need to spruce up my LinkedIn now? No. Quite a few years ago, I changed my status to retired. Previous to that, teacher. Previous to that, financial planner. But my status on LinkedIn now is retirement. Every now and again, I jump onto LinkedIn, have a bit of a look what are my old colleagues up to. Sometimes there's news stories and articles on socio-economic matters that I find interesting, and I jumped in. But I'm not active on LinkedIn. I've moved on. I'm retired. Occasionally on LinkedIn, I will see the proverbial miserable ghost. I'll see old colleagues of mine who are retired and they're still active on LinkedIn. But they kind of use LinkedIn almost like Facebook. They get into politics and all kinds of spicy topics. I don't do that. I don't do that. But, that's a strategy some people employ in retirement. They're free from the shackles of corporate political correctness. They can be a bit more freestyle with their politics. And some of them go a little bit crazy on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, in my observation. So if you're watching this video and you're thinking, well, besides becoming a keyboard warrior and some of those other strategies like mentoring, volunteering, embracing your creativity, taking on new health projects and hobbies, you're thinking, well, my identity capital has eroded. I'm suffering from severe relevance deprivation. What's the nuclear option? So in regards the nuclear option of going back to work, let me tell you a couple of stories. A story of someone I ran into and a story about myself, because that is an option. Okay, if you feel your integrity capital has eroded, you're feeling like too much of a ghost in retirement. So first things first, a story I heard. I was in Chayapum in central Isan. Must have been 12 months, 18 months ago. I was chatting to a chap in a bar there. Retired electrician. And out of the blue, an acquaintance had contacted him about getting back on the tools. Coming back to Australia and working for this person, and quite lucrative. And he said, you know what, I'm coming out of retirement. Okay, now I don't know how that story ended, but back on the tools. Never say never. And I'm filming this in Australia where the inflation monster, the ultimate elephant in the room when it comes to economic measurements, hey, maybe you come out of retirement. This guy, qualified electrician, I tell you what, electricians and plumbers, they are the blue-collar elites of Australia, and you can earn some pretty good coin in this country if you're a fully qualified, licensed and competent electrician or plumber, amongst many other trades that pay quite well down under. And so folks, how about a personal story for yours truly in regards to the so-called, as I call it, nuclear option of going back to the workforce? Let me tell you my story. So folks, my story, half a dozen years ago, I retired, self-funded retiree. Now, just before I jump into the story, when it comes to identity capital, in Australia, it's a bit of a badge of honour to say I'm a self-funded retiree. And, you know, I do, you know, maybe I'm guilty as charged of engaging in a little bit of hyperbole myself, being a bit hyperbolic. I do occasionally slip in that I am an early self-funded retiree, and, you know, that's an identity for me. And that was me half a dozen years ago. Went off to Jomtien, hung out Jomtien patio, Hua Hin, Bangkok for about 6 months. You know, I got bored. Financially, I didn't need to go back to work, but, you know, my identity capital had eroded. And so I did volunteer work, and then from volunteer work, I got back into paid employment for a couple of years. Back to full-time work. Based on my initial, I don't know, false flag, false start, retirement, my retirement full-time that only lasted 6 months, I was subconsciously aware of this identity capital issue, you know, and keeping myself busy. Now, yes, you know, social media was going to fill that vacuum, but as a little bit of a stopgap, I did online business English and conversational English language teaching. It was only for a short time. I was doing it 5 days a week, then 4 days a week, then 3 days a week, and then no days a week. So guys, a lot of people talk about transition to retirement, you know, going from 5 days a week to 4 days to 3 days to 2 days. You can kind of do a reverse transition out of retirement. You don't have to go back to full-time work. You could go back to a bit of part-time work. Maybe that's a stopgap. If you're feeling you're suffering from a bit of relevance deprivation, and in more pragmatic terms, maybe a little bit of cash flow. So there you go. There's another way of dealing with that. You know, you're feeling like a bit of a ghost, feeling a little bit irrelevant. You can always go back to work, guys, but you don't have to go back to the high pressure, you know, stakes game. You can kind of ease back into the workforce, and then you can just, like I did, just ease out the exit door. No fanfare, no retirement party send-off. You just jump back into retirement. So folks, a couple of stories to share with you before we wrap up today's vlog. And I suppose these stories, in my opinion, highlight the fact that it is important to let go and move on in retirement. It is important to consider how you're going to identify yourself, define yourself. What new roles are you going to take on in retirement? Why do I feel that's important to consider? There you go, guys, a bit of fauna. Hello, birdie. So 2 real life stories before we wrap up today's vlog. The first one, I was working probably about 15 years ago now, corporate BDM, business development manager. I visited a transport company and I did an on-site information seminar. When I was finished, I was talking to the operations manager. I said, I noticed a few guys at the seminar who weren't wearing uniforms, older gentlemen. I asked him, what's up with that? He proceeded to tell me that there were a batch of guys in the tea room. This is a bus company, retired bus company drivers, but a couple of times a week they just come into the tea room and hang out with the guys who are still driving the buses. I'm not judging that. It's just they hadn't moved on though, had they, folks? I could see it in his eyes. He was okay with it, you know, but these guys had retired. They still identify as being bus drivers. Nothing wrong with that, but, you know, hey, look at this, guys. I have to interrupt myself. Can you see it? Kookaburra. The Australian kingfisher. Bird of prey. These things will take out large snakes, lizards, and other vertebrates and invertebrates. The Aussie kookaburra. Hello, Mr. Kookaburra. Let's get back to the talking point. So, yeah, he was okay with it, this guy. He was basically saying, look, you know, he's all right with it. But, you know, I remember telling my colleagues back in the office, they said, it's a little bit pathetic, isn't it? I said, well, not necessarily. It's just that these guys, they're still kind of caught up in the identity of being bus drivers. They haven't identified maybe as something else. Interesting one, isn't it? What are your thoughts on that story, guys? And my final kind of story for context today. One of my old colleagues moved to Sydney, and he ended up getting a job in the public service in Sydney, and he'd changed office buildings. Their department had moved to this other office building, and there was a coffee shop downstairs. He said after a few months, he asked one of his colleagues about this gentleman. This guy looked like he was in his 70s, well dressed. Several times a week he would sit by himself in the coffee shop with a notepad and paper, and he asked his colleague, what's up with this guy? Do you know him? And yeah, so my friend spoke to an experienced colleague, and he said, yeah, that's old so-and-so. He retired quite a few years ago, but he still comes to work dressed for success, sitting in the tea room. The guy hadn't moved on. You know, I play an amateur psychologist, but I suspect that guy's identity was so bundled up in his industry, his profession, his occupation, that in retirement he's still almost like a pantomime playing dress-ups, you know, coming back into the coffee shop below the office, almost acting like he was still an employee. He didn't want to be a ghost. So there we go, folks. That's my final little story. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Retirement and the ghost in the machine. Please, guys, feel free to comment. If you're going to opine, keep it classy, but, you know, are you retired? What are your strategies, you know, to avoid becoming a ghost? Or if you're happy to be a ghost, a friendly ghost, not a miserable ghost. You know, did any of the strategies that I shared today resonate with you? Have you got some other ideas yourself when that, identity capital starts to erode, when relevance deprivation rears its ugly head? You know, what are your thoughts on managing that in retirement? Either way, guys, whether you comment, whether you like, share or subscribe, I'm just happy you watched this video, and there are many more socio-economical, philosophical videos in the back catalogue of CoffeeChillTVs, lots of walkabouts, lots of walk and talks. I hope to see you again soon on the original CoffeeChillTV. Wherever you are in the world today, take care.